Hey guys, so week 6 and 7, I wasn't able to do the sessions, so they're going to be recordings. I hope everyone's been well, and our final last in-person session for week 7 will be in person. So welcome to week 6, policy making and strategies. Let's get started. So choosing the best policy for your firms. Now, companies have very different structures according to their financial policies. From Forbes, corporate policy management should have these key tools when acting policies. Number one, policies should fall under one authority where policies and procedures are consolidated. Number two, they should be centralized. They should be in a centralized location on both paper and electronically. Number three, they need to be constantly reviewed and updated as necessary on a constant basis as things changed, and this has to be communicated to all of the participants involved. Number four, policies must have an official owner within an organization. One person must keep these policies and be responsible for them. Number five, policies must be implemented with means of monitoring and consequences for behavior. This means that just because you have policies, you need to enforce your rules that you have to make sure that compliance is being followed. Number six, policies must comply to standards and regulations. This means that the rules that a company writes for itself must comply with federal, state, local, and any other regulations that it has to follow. Number seven, policies must be certified, meaning they must get approval from the board. They must be approved by senior management before they take effect. Otherwise, they will not be legitimately recognized. Now, this is different depending on the company that a person is at. Number eight, policies must be managed beyond the corporation itself, meaning that a third party, like an auditing service, the government has to come in and make sure, okay, the firm is actually following their policies, they're complying with these rules and regulations, both internally and externally, and everything is going well. Financial structure. Okay, so financial structure, what it essentially does, it essentially refers to the mix of debt and equity that a company uses to finance its operations. So debt, that is something that a company uses to raise money by issuing something called bonds, meaning that it's basically a loan that the company gives out, that the company takes in from a variety of people. Yeah, and the people who hold a piece of paper that say, okay, at the end of a certain period called the maturity date, you can exchange this bond for your cash plus the interest that you've been getting all along, because bonds get interest because they're a form of debt that has to get interest to match inflation. So that is debt financing. Yes, and companies are legally required by law to pay off their debt and pay interest. Otherwise, the debt holders can initiate bankruptcy proceedings, which can liquidate the company, and they have first claim on the cash flows of the company at all times. Now, equity financing, basically that means that a company is giving away small pieces of itself called shares to people who become the owners. They're called shareholders, they're called stockholders, stock owners, so on and so forth. So equity financing is generally the most expensive because when a company wants to buy back its shares, if it's grown substantially, it will have to pay a lot more than when it first issued the share for a much smaller price, as opposed to debt, which only has the principal payment, which is the same when the company issued, when they issued the bond, as well as interest, any and all interest that has to be paid. So we're going to take a look at private versus public, the different types of companies. So private and public companies use generally the same framework for developing the financial structure, but there are key differences between the two. So private equity is only open to select investors as opposed to public investors on the stock exchange. And private companies, some of them have no shares at all. Like I believe Dell is a private company. It's not publicly listed. You or I can't go out and purchase shares of that company. Now, public equity, on the other hand, is open to all investors on a stock exchange or public traded stock exchange. And this means that, let's say a company, for example, Amazon or Google, they have shares listed, their companies listed on the stock exchanges, the stock market. You or I or anyone could go in and purchase shares for the share price, and we would hold those pieces of a company. Now, debt versus equity. So debt, as previously reiterating from previous, is when a company borrows money to finance its operations. It issues bonds as a sort of promissory note saying, hey, you lent me money. This is proof that you lent me money, you being the bondholder and me being the company, and meaning that at the end of the state, you will get all the money that you paid me plus interest because it is debt. And equity is when a company sells shares that represent ownership in the company. And we have two key ratios that we use. There are many more, but we're going to start out with two. The debt to capital and debt to equity ratios are essentially key indicators to use that people use to see more to a company's capital structure, essentially what the number they're telling us. A higher debt equity ratio means that a company is using more debt than equity in its financing operations in its company structure. Compliance. Okay, so corporate compliance is the ability to lead large groups of people toward achieving certain standards of conduct. This is done through internal and external compliance. Now, internal compliance deals with all members of a company complying with the company policies, procedures different from law. Those are monitored and enforced by the company's upper staff. External compliance is companies must comply with the laws, rules, and other regulations from a government, and they are monitored and enforced by the government. This means that if you break external compliance, you risk jail time, you risk fines, you risk penalties from the government, and because you are essentially breaking the law if you do not follow external compliance. And an example of external compliance is SOX, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which mandates accounting reporting standards. We talked about that previously. And if companies don't follow this, which are required to, they will face penalties and they will face some pretty serious consequences because you need to be truthful and transparent and follow all rules and regulations set forth by the state and locality in which you are doing your business. For internal compliance, it's different for every company, but generally they follow along the same moral, ethical, and moral and guiding principles that a company has. They are monitored and enforced by the company's upper staff. This includes managers all the way up to the top level of a company. They will enforce these. They will randomly and all the time, they might check. So, and like I said, it's pretty much dependent on the company itself. It's a very circumstantial thing for internal compliance. This is typically overseen by high-level staff of the company, a couple of people. They will make sure that no funny business is going on. There are tools for monitoring all types of behavior and to make sure that all rules and regulation, both internal and external, are being followed. Public policy. Okay, so there is increasing public pressure from the public sector to increase transparency among companies and organizations. We have issues such as climate change and global warming make the case for sustainability a big issue. Issues such as the climate itself make sustainability a big issue. Companies can evaluate their positions, see where their money is actually going towards. So this is a good quote. Corporations have a responsibility for their shareholders, communities, and employees to participate in the public policy process to enhance business and shareholder value. Now, what this means is that essentially corporations, you have to balance between making money for your shareholders and paying your workers to serving the community you operate in and helping the world around you, essentially. So that is it for this meeting. Thank you so much for coming. I apologize we couldn't be in a live setting. The circumstances just couldn't let that happen. So this meeting, week 6 and week 7 will be recordings that are going to be emailed to you guys. And week 8, our last week, will be in person, but I will also send a recording out after that. Thank you for coming. Please email me if you have any and all questions. I will see you in the next event. Bye, guys.